Hi there, welcome to The Real Agenda with me, Tom Burgess. Thanks for joining us. Hope you're keeping safe and well. Now today we're going to be talking about how you could save money on tax. No, not by avoiding it, but how out-of-date taxes could be abolished and replaced with a fairer system. I'll be talking with Andrew Dixon, a former Goldman Sachs executive and now founder of Fairer Share, a campaigning group proposing the proportional property tax, which will replace the outdated council tax and the archaic stamp duty. Well, that certainly sounds like a good idea. Plus, we'll have a closer look at some of the news from campaigning groups that are reshaping our world and seeking to bring a more compassionate and just society in these crazy COVID times.
I'm Gavin Essler, and I want to see in Britain a more compassionate and just society. And that's one of the reasons I listen to The Real Agenda.
So before we speak to Andrew, let's get an update on some of the news. Now, it was wonderful to learn that my much-missed good friend, the Reverend Paul Nicholson, has been posthumously awarded the Long-Term Achievement Prize at this year's Sheila McKechnie National Campaigner Awards. Now, the Reverend Paul sadly died in March 2020 at the age of 87, and he campaigned tirelessly for better living standards for those on low incomes. During his lifetime, the Reverend Paul's campaigning activity was regularly covered in the media and his letters frequently published in The Guardian. His research work was also instrumental in the introduction of the London living wage under the then Mayor Ken Livingstone, and it formed the basis of the real living wage. The Reverend Paul founded Taxpayers Against Poverty, an organisation that campaigns for affordable homes and adequate income for those in or out of work, and I have the honour of being a director of that group. He also established the influential charity Zacchaeus 2000 Trust, which helps individuals claim the benefits they're entitled to and prevents homelessness. The National Campaigner Awards celebrate the best campaigns and campaigners, whether working locally or nationally, and are from individuals and groups to people working in large organisations. It seems that voters want to see a change to the tax systems and are open to increase taxes if they are fairer. Not so much increasing taxes on everyone, but rebalancing the tax system. Now, in a very recent episode of The Real Agenda, we talked to Robert Palmer of Tax Justice UK, who had just issued a report called Talking Tax. And amongst its findings, it seems that Conservative voter support for higher taxes has gone up during lockdown, and they are now more supportive of a range of taxes on wealth, more so than the general public. Another report, entitled The People's Budget, reinforces these findings. The think tank Demos found that a large majority of the public are supportive of progressive tax rises, including 2019 Conservative voters. The report also found that more than half of the British public, 58%, would support raising income tax for everyone by 2p in the pound, while raising the personal allowance so that those earning less than $20,000 do not pay any more. Only 17% of the public actually oppose this measure, whilst 2019 Conservative voters are more likely to support this measure, 64%, than other respondents. The nationally representative poll from over 2,000 people found that just 7 in 10, that's 69% of the public, wanted to see income tax on earnings over $100,000 per year raised by 10p in the pound. Demos also found that 46% of the public support equalising the tax treatment of capital gains with income from work, with only 18% opposing it. The vast majority, 63% of the public, also support making the self-employed pay the same national insurance contribution as employees, on the condition that self-employed receive the same benefits as employees. So while the evidence piles up, there's still no action to rebalance our tax systems so that it is fairer. Come on, this is what the people want, and the government is meant to serve the people, not ignore them. In other news, The Real Agenda has been selected as one of the top 30 social political podcasts by FeedSpot, the content company. Well, that's good to know, so pass the message on, and thanks very much indeed for listening. We'll be giving some more news in our next episode, and if you'd like news of your campaign group included here, then let us know at info@realagenda.org. And also listen out for Inequality Bites, a new podcast series from the Equality Trust, exclusive to the Real Agenda Network. Subscribe now through your podcast provider. So let's find out how we could say goodbye to council tax and that groan of stamp duty. Governments have consistently shied away from addressing issues of tax head-on, as they're too scared of the revolts among those with wealth and influence. Often such reforms do not happen because politicians do not really understand how it works. Yes, they've told me that, but it would be indiscreet of me to say who it was. As a result, council tax has gone without serious updates since it was introduced in 1993. And according to the lender Nationwide, the average house price in 1993 was $50,000. And now in 2020, it's $224,000. That's 5 times higher, yet the council tax bands remain the same. Back then, most homes were in the lower band, and now most are in the highest band. It's crazy, isn't it? Not only is the system outdated, it's inherently unfair. And how about this? According to Bloomberg, the Sultan of Brunei, who controls assets of £40 billion, that's 40 billion, paid $1,950 a year in council tax on his mansion in Kensington Palace Gardens in London in 2012, just £32 more than the Braithwaites, a pensioner couple living with their daughter and grandchildren in a rented home in Goulburn Road just 2 miles away. Now, the idea of tax on land value has been discussed for over 100 years, and it's even been favoured by Winston Churchill, but vested interests have kept it off the statute books. So it's good that there are many campaign groups, including some groups within the main political parties, that campaign for such reforms. And now the group Fairer Share, set up by today's guest Andrew Dixon, proposes a proportional property tax. An initial part of this initiative was a letter to the Sunday Times on the 6th of September calling on the government to replace council tax and stamp duty with one simple property tax based on the actual property value and people's ability to pay. It will result in a fairer system of taxation. As we know, council tax can cause great hardship for low-income groups and is unpopular and based in England and Scotland on property valuations that are almost 30 years old. The letter was signed by 25 individuals and campaigning groups, including the chair of the Coalition for Economic Justice, that's me, along with the Institute of Public Policy Research, the Equality Trust, Demos, Taxpayers Against Poverty, Adam Smith Institute, and the former Liberal Democrat leader Sir Vince Cable, to name but a few. So now let me get Andrew to explain what's the problem with our property taxes.
Well, here in this country, we've got sort of 2 key property taxes. One is council tax and one is stamp duty. If I start with stamp duty, one of the major problems there is that it's a very lumpy tax bill that's incurred on purchase. And I think that's a real deterrent for people looking to move up and down the property ladder. And the other element is council tax, which is a very regressive tax. So most taxes are usually correlated with, say, income or value. But in the case of council tax, actually, there's not a great correlation between value and the amount of tax paid. So in various parts of the country, one might pay 1 to 2 to 3% of the property tax in council tax, whereas in other parts, such as London and South East, it might be 0.1, 0.2, 0.3%. So
of the value of the property.
Of the value of the property, that's right. So in effect, the tax rate is a lot higher in the regions, which I think is very unfair.
And isn't it the case that really people perceive that council tax goes to pay for local services, but it doesn't really, does it? It just goes to the government.
Yeah, that's right. It's a great question. I mean, part of it does go to local services, but I think, as you say, there is a misunderstanding because there's a huge amount of money that is redistributed from central government to the regions to cover some of their costs. And I think as we look at the implications of COVID, clearly, given the cost, for example, of adult social care, it's very difficult for those local communities to fund those services out of their council tax receipts. So I think, the redistribution needs to continue, but if anything, it needs to be enhanced. So
with council tax, what we're saying here is that it's unfair because you've got people on lower incomes or that are paying a greater percentage of their income than those that have got much higher value property.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we had a nice email from someone who's supporting us the other day. She lives in County Durham in a Band D property. and she pays about £2,200 a year in council tax, which works out to be roughly about 1.25% of the value of her home. And you compare that, for example, with council tax, say, in Westminster, where there's a cap of £1,560 a year. You could be living in a £3, £4, £5, £6 million house in Westminster and still be paying £1,560 a year in council tax, which is roughly, less than 0.02% of the value of the property. So, yeah, there's lots of things that we can improve there. It's less around income, it's more around the assets, really. And clearly, London and the South East has benefited from huge amounts of investment in infrastructure. So that's why a lot of the assets and property prices in London and the South East have increased, and that hasn't been mirrored in other parts of the country.
And your proposal is going to be also that it's only paid by the owners of the property, not by the tenants.
Yes, that's right. So instead of having confusing and complicated different bands, we're proposing that the property owner pays 0.48% of the value of the property per year in proportional property tax. And we feel that's a fairer way to solve some of these issues. And as you say, it's to be paid by the landowner, the property owner, not by the tenant. And there's a couple of reasons for this. The main one for us is that we've got to make sure that those who are asset rich but cash poor, i.e. those who live in nice big houses but have no money to pay the tax, have the opportunity to defer that payment until they either pass away or sell the property. And so therefore, to solve for this problem, the obligation to pay needs to be transferred from the tenant to the owner.
So it always used to be that, I can't remember when it was, that when it was rates, paid rates, that was just the landowner and the owners of the property, wasn't it? Not the tenants.
That's right.
So why did that change?
Oh, I'd have to go back through the history books, I guess, and have a look. I mean, I think it was part of the initiative to sort of communicate that people were paying for a local service rather than a tax on a particular asset. But I think things have changed now, and I think because of the inequalities that exist, both regionally and intergenerationally, it's only fair for the owner of the property to pay the tax. Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot of that tax will be passed on from the property owner to the tenant. So there is a chance the tenant, through higher rents, will end up paying part of that tax. But I think it should be a manageable transition.
We're not taxing income here; we're taxing wealth. And those that have wealth, the increase in value of property is actually nothing to do with them. It just goes up anyway. Or obviously, if the area, is an area up and coming, so therefore they haven't earned it. So is that, does that make sense? Then that they should be the ones that should be taxed on it because it's been created by the community.
Yes, completely agree. Absolutely, I think that's exactly right. And the other element, of course, is that in this country, capital gains on primary properties is tax-free. So property owners in this country have done remarkably well, often not through hard work of their own, but through, as you say, investment in the community, infrastructure, etc., etc.
Is this going to increase the amount of tax collected by the government?
Good question. We didn't think it was within our gift to make that decision as to whether this should be a tax increase or a tax cut. So what we did was we made it revenue neutral. So the revenue received currently through council tax and stamp duty will be offset, matched by the tax generated through the proportional property tax.
So the tax is effectively rebalanced to those with greater assets?
Exactly. It's rebalancing regionally and intergenerationally. So what we will see is about £6.5 billion tax cut for those in the regions, and that will be offset by a £6.5 billion increase in taxes paid by London and the South East. Also, those who might have second homes or empty homes, etc., they would incur a surcharge as well.
But about 75% of households will save.
That's right. Our numbers only apply to England. We haven't looked at Scotland and Wales yet, but that's right. 75% of households in England will gain, and that equates to roughly about 18 million households.
So that's going to be quite a benefit to a lot of people.
Hopefully, yes, and I think much needed as well, given the challenges we face as a consequence of COVID.
Changes in property tax has been talked about. Why would you not suggest then we just change the council tax bands, which are so out of date?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think possibly that's the way the Chancellor will go, and I think he'll add a couple of extra bands at the top end. To be honest, I think this is a band-aid rather than a solution. I think we need a more fundamental reform, because you can add a couple of bands, but it doesn't resolve the inequities that exist, particularly those living in more modest houses. So I think a more radical solution is required. And, we don't charge a higher rate of VAT on a Ford Fiesta than we do on a Ferrari, so it sort of doesn't really make a lot of sense as to why we have a higher rate of council tax on more modest houses compared to those that are larger. So I think, this time is right for radical reform. I think we have to be brave. I think one of the challenges is obviously the politics, but I think we have an opportunity for two reasons, really. One is this Conservative Party have a clear mandate for reform, and they were elected with a mission to level up, and I think this gives them that opportunity to reform. And secondly, obviously, the implications of COVID means it's very, very challenging for local communities to increase their tax take. So I think there does need to be a greater redistribution from the southeastern London towards those that have been left behind. So I do see this as a great opportunity, but the politics, as I think you're alluding, will be challenging.
The changes in property taxes have been discussed for years, and the concept of land value tax, which is more or less basically what you're talking about. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, I'm a big fan of land value tax. In fact, we did some work on reforming business rates, which we recommended an LVT solution to business rates, and we called it the commercial landowner levy. We then applied the same team and the same sort of ideas towards an LVT on to look at residential properties. We made it it was quite difficult to resolve, though, because of the land values in London. Would mean we'd have to have thresholds and compensations, etc. So, in effect, we have a tax on the property, which effectively is a de facto LVT, in my opinion, and I think it's a perfectly adequate solution.
Land value tax has been talked about for a very long time. I mean, even Winston Churchill was in favour of it, I understand. So why hasn't this actually happened, these changes, similar to what you're suggesting? We just carry on with the same old thing. No one is stepping up and saying, we need to reform that. And, it's very interesting that the Conservative Party, or members of the Conservative Party, some MPs are now actually questioning this and suggesting various changes. And surprisingly, the Labour Party is still looking at it. If you ask them, well, we're considering it. So how are we going to get this changed? Because it's so unfair, it's so difficult for lots of people, and it causes so much hardship. How are we going to get it changed?
A very good question, yes. I mean, we're working hard. We're engaging with Conservative MPs, particularly those north of the Red Wall, who've clearly have an obligation to look after their constituents, and their constituents will recognise the inequities that exist. I think there are three elements to our reform that should help us. One is obviously the fairness argument that we've talked about quite extensively. I think secondly is a simplicity argument. Obviously our current tax system on property is quite complicated, different bands, etc., etc. And I think this simplicity argument is something that we can definitely put forward to the Conservative Party. So I'm quite hopeful about that. And then the third element is around aspiration. And I think clearly the Conservative Party are a party of aspiration. And I think stamp duty sort of stands in the way of that, which is why we've combined both the reform of council tax and the reform of stamp duty into one policy. And we're hoping that perhaps the reform of council tax will appeal to those slightly on the left of the party, and the reform of stamp duty will appeal to those slightly on the right of the party. So that's our view, is if we combine both elements together, that hopefully will give us a greater opportunity to bring about the reforms that are needed.
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, why, stamp duty, it's just crazy. I mean, if you were going to have stamp duty, then have it on the people who are selling the property, who've made a capital gain on it, rather than it making hardship for people that are actually buying the property. It doesn't make any sense.
I completely agree. It doesn't, although I have to admit I'm not a great fan of paying the tax on sale either, because I think that also is a deterrent to sort of moving, which I don't, I look at my parents, for example, they live in a nice house in Cheam. If they were to sell their property, they would incur if we had CGT on primary residence, they would have a large tax bill, and I don't think that would motivate them to downsize. So, one of the key drivers for us is very much to sort of capture that revenue over the life of the ownership rather than either at the beginning or at the end.
Well, exactly. I mean, I agree. I'm not in favour of it being on the people selling the properties either. And I think what you're suggesting makes a lot of sense. You're proposing that we would get rid of stamp duty completely, but we'd actually be revenue neutral by the change in the property tax system. Overall, what's coming in and what's going out is going to be the same. Obviously, some people are going to be paying more.
Correct, that's right. There is one sort of slight nuance. So we're saying we remove stamp duty for buyers on their primary residence, but we are recommending to retain stamp duty for those who have the luxury of buying second homes, for example, or holiday homes, and for those who are foreign buyers.
So what can people who are listening to this and think, yeah, this guy's right, this is crazy. That's been most of the population, I hope. But, what can they do about it to make change happen?
Very kind of you to ask, Tom. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me along today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for getting this far. We have a website, fairashare.org.uk. There's an introductory video. There's a calculator. We have a petition. So, for example, if you wanted to sign the petition, that would be a great help. We're really pleased that over 50,000 households have signed so far, which is really exciting. We have a widget to enable you to email your MP to outline some of the injustices that exist around council tax and some of the sort of anti-aspiration elements of stamp duty. So, yeah, please do get involved. Please do email your MP, sign the petition, share us on Facebook, on Twitter, mention it to your friends and family.
Surely, with such a large percentage of households who are renting, that's going to be something that they won't need to pay once council tax is reformed on the basis that you've said. So you would think there would be a huge interest in doing this. Or is it the rich and powerful, or those with the wealth, are sort of the vested interests are saying, no, we don't want it?
Yes, it is interesting because we have been obviously talking to Conservative MPs, and one of their concerns is that their donors will not be supportive of this sort of reform. Which would be a great pity, and I think our political system is fairer than that. I think we do believe in fairness and simplicity and supporting aspiration. I think these reforms do talk to that. I think if there is a minority or a certain vested interest that will lobby against these reforms, then I would find that very disappointing. But I would hope that at the end of the day, once everyone's understood some of the iniquities and the inequalities and sort of the general unfairness with the existing system, I would hope that that even the sort of wealthiest donors would recognise that reform is needed and it needs to be on a proportional basis and along the lines of what we're proposing. So, yes, I'm here for the long haul. I don't think this will be an easy battle, but I think it's a fight well worth fighting.
So is the people that we need to talk to actually those that are more wealthy, that have bigger properties and or have greater property assets? These are the people we need to convince so they don't complain about it.
Yes, indeed. And, I am spending my time sort of looking to reach out to some of the Conservative donors to explain, the rationale. So, yes, absolutely. Completely agree.
There's a lot to be done to rebalance the inequalities, which is causing so much unnecessary financial hardship. I mean, one of the causes, the big causes of homelessness is that people get into debt, and typically it's it's rent, but it's also council tax.
Shocking figures on the number of people who are struggling to pay their council tax.
We've got to sort out these inequality issues. I think the sort of tax proposal you've been talked about, yes, it has been talked about for some time, but we've just got to get it over the line. And if you're really targeting particularly the Conservative MPs, to make sure that everybody knows that actually this is better for all of us, because more money circulating in the economy is going to be a good thing. So this is what you've told us, what people have got to do and sign up. And, thanks very much indeed for talking about it. I think this is very important. If we can get this pushed along a bit and get more people understanding instead of writing it off, which you actually find. I mean, I've talked to a few MPs over the years. You try to talk to them about land value tax, it sort of glaze over. because they don't fully understand it. And you get these, the example you mentioned before about, an older person who has a big property but doesn't have any income or very little income. Therefore, but, there's an answer to that. There's answers to all these things with this sort of proposal. So, I wish you the best of luck with that. We'll certainly talk about this again because we really want to get this going and get some action on it. And thanks very much for initiating this new.
No, you're welcome.
campaign.
Thank you for inviting me. Really enjoyed the discussion. Some great questions, lots for us to think about, and look forward to giving you an update in a few months' time with some progress.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Andrew, and we'll speak
Very
to you
good.
again soon. All
Well
right.
done. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Andrew. We wish you great success with the campaign. Good luck. So it sounds as if this proposal is appealing to the majority of people who will in fact save money. And it's also practical, not difficult to implement. Now, many years ago, earlier property taxes called the rates were paid only by property owners. But we were sold the idea with the poll tax that local property taxes were to pay for local services. And this continued when it was modified and called the council tax. A key to the problem is that many people who own their own property think they have created the increase in the value themselves and should therefore keep the proceeds. No, it's the community that create the wealth, and even those in rented accommodation. It is the value of the land goes up because the value created by good infrastructure, transport, good schools and community services, usually paid for by the taxpayer, as well, of course, private business that sees an opportunity and invests in an area. You only have to go to look at estate agents' particulars, where it mentions the good schools or the closeness to rail and motorway links, as well as shops like Marks and Spencer's and Waitrose. So it's only right that some of this value that property owners benefit from is returned to the community that actually earned it, in the form of a property tax in proportion to the value of the property, which in turn is related to the value of the land. So what do you think? Do contact us on info@realagenda.org or via our website, realagenda.org. We'd love to hear your views, and we hope we can help inform you, involve you, and inspire you into action. Now, the Real Agenda is partnered with the Coalition for Economic Justice, a network of like-minded groups campaigning for a fairer society that seek more equitable access to the prosperity created by us all. The CEJ seeks to build strength and unity by finding common ground and create awareness that real change is possible through a collaborative, inclusive and non-partisan approach. And special thanks to our sponsors, the Reverse Media Group, one of the fastest growing search and media companies. Find out why at reversemediagroup.com. So what's coming up next on the Real Agenda? We'll be talking to Dr. Gail Bradbrook, the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, about their new campaign, Money Rebellion. And also we'll be talking to the team at Compassion in Politics and Taxpayers Against Poverty. Now, one thing is certain, people want to see change to a more compassionate and just society, as well as more courageous politicians who are prepared to do the right thing for people over party. It's urgent, and it's up for us to make it happen. Because that's the Real Agenda. I'm Tom Burgess. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.